Welcome to the meeting of the Skokie Village Board for Tuesday, March the 7th, 2023. This evening, we will be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Village Clerk Pramod Shah. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The meeting will come to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Trustee Sutker,
Here.
Trustee Robinson,
Here.
Trustee Kuhn,
Here.
Trustee Johnson,
Here.
Trustee Pure Slovin.
She's absent.
Trustee Klein. Here. Mayor Van Dusen.
Here we have a quorum. Next item is approval of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. A motion is in order. Trustee Sutker, seconded by Trustee Kuhn. Is there anything on the agenda anybody would like to have removed? Trustee Johnson.
I'd like to remove 11A.
11A is removed.
Recorded yet? It's not recorded?
She asked if it's being recorded.
Is the meeting being recorded?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you want me to clarify the screen?
Sure.
So the screen is activated when there's a trustee or an elected official on Zoom, and so there's not an elected official on Zoom this evening.
I'd like to pull something off. This is new for me. 8A Plan Commission.
Okay.
What was that?
Okay.
Oh, 8.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Aye.
Trustee Klein.
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. Next item would be appointments. The appointment of Scott Berman to the Plan Commission. A motion is in order. Trustee Klein, seconded by Trustee Robinson. Did you wish to address it?
I wrote it this time, so I won't be so discombobulated. I'm not sure if you'll entertain my questions, Mayor Van Dusen, but the appointment process, once again, is frustrating and lacking in transparency. How many people applied to be on the Plan Commission?
2 or 3.
And when did Scott Berman apply to rejoin the Plan Commission?
3 weeks ago.
Okay. Were the others who applied even considered for an appointment, or was Scott Berman selected as soon as there was an opening to plug the hole with somebody who will follow the status quo? Because that's what it feels like. I don't know him, and I'm betting he's a good guy. Superdog gives me all the feels from my childhood. My mom loved that place. But I do know others who applied, people who are highly qualified, and I'm wondering what makes him a better pick than them. I have my suspicions. Almost exactly a year ago, I was having a conversation with one of the trustees who brought up the commissions as a way for people like me who are passionate to get involved and have an impact. I laughed out loud. I pointed out that some of the commissions seemed like nothing more than window dressing and were simply not utilized, and then asked who makes the appointments. The commissions that do have an impact, such as the Plan Commission, seemed off limits, and still do, to anyone unconnected. At that time, 6 members of the Plan Commission were members of the board of the Skokie Caucus Party. It's currently 5 of 9. Can someone get appointed to the Plan Commission if they're not connected to the caucus party or those who serve on that board? And why does it seem that the same folks get shuffled around various commissions while others who apply get no appointments at all? The gentleman put forward tonight served on several commissions, including the Plan Commission over the year. There are others. A little more than a year ago, when I started attending and watching Plan Commission meetings, one person who was on the Plan Commission is now the Chair of Beautification, appointed to that position despite not even having served on that commission that I'm aware of. He's a loud and proud member of the Skokie Caucus Party. Scott Berman is not on the board of the Skokie Caucus Party as far as I know, but it seems he did serve on the TBI board with at least a few Skokie Caucus Party board members, including Michael Lorge, who I guess isn't technically on the Skokie Caucus Party board. But I drove past your house before the 4th of July and saw you guys decorating the Skokie Caucus Party float. That's how I learned where you lived. Curious where the float was being decorated. We're neighbors. And he was the chair for a long time. At the same time, one of the current plan commissioners, also on the Caucus Party board currently, was serving on the TBI board. To be clear, I wouldn't see a problem with this connection if it didn't seem that nearly every appointment, at least to the Plan Commission, leads back to the party. And I've talked about this before, being unable to see where the line is between our government and the party. It results in those who are well qualified but not connected to the caucus party or its members being passed over, I believe, to the detriment of our village. Finally, a person of color resigned at the last meeting, which was the first meeting after it was pointed out that she'd not attended meetings for quite some time and should no longer be on the commission in accordance with Article 7, Section 2-447 of the Village Code. Today, the mayor is putting forward someone who has served on our village, which I'm sure he's a great guy, thank you, for many years it seems, while others still wait in the wings. I would be remiss not to point out that the demographics of the Plan Commission do not even closely reflect the demographics of our village, and that this appointment, while ignoring other applicants, some of who I know, so it's at least 3, would make the Plan Commission even less reflective of the demographics of our village. There are people who are not connected, who are qualified, who are diverse, who want to serve, and are not given the chance. There seems to be a stranglehold on the Plan Commission, and I strongly feel it needs to be opened up to include the voices of those who are not connected, and that we need a transparent process as to how these appointments are made. And why is Scott Berman already listed on the Plan Commission website as a commissioner currently? To me, it says it's done before it's even voted on. Yes, it is. I mean, you can pull it up.
I'm not.
Okay, he's been listed since last week. That was
He
how I
should-
found out
he
who it
shouldn't
was.
have been.
Well, he was.
Okay, shouldn't have been. First of all, let me explain. Scott Berman is a unique human being. I don't know, you say you don't know him, so let me tell you something about him, just so you do know. He's a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School, and he has spent his life in urban planning. He was the first chairman of the Skokie Environmental Commission, along with Deborah Short. Some of you may know Deborah Short. I think we are all admirers of Deborah Short. I don't think anybody would criticize President Biden for appointing Deborah Short to be regional director of the Environmental Protection Agency, even though Deborah has a long history in government. Having long-time specialty in urban planning is something that you don't get very often, particularly combined with long-time work in the environment. Scott, the names of the agencies that Scott has worked with: the Urban Land Institute, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, Catholic Charities, the Korean American Service Committee, the U.S. Small Business Administration, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development, is not something that you get every day. He also is a businessman, as was just pointed out. He is part of Superdog, a family business. He's chairman of the board, if I understand correctly. But one of the other things that highly recommend Scott is his background across the country, not just in Chicago, not just in Skokie, but across the country in affordable housing. When Scott told me a couple of years ago that he needed to leave the Plan Commission, it was for personal reasons. And the fact that Scott wants to return is something that I think the community should be grateful for. He has an enormous amount of experience to bring to Plan Commission cases, and anybody who observed him in his previous service to the village will tell you he is certainly anything but a reflexive person. He is not a member of the board of directors. I'm not even aware that he's a member of the Skokie Caucus Party. I don't care if he is or he isn't. All I care about is that Scott Berman is willing to apply his knowledge of finance, real estate, the environment, as well as small business to our Plan Commission cases, and that he will do the job he had done for us previously. I'm proud that Scott Berman is agreeable to joining the Skokie Plan Commission.
Can I just ask what two pharmacists and a person who works for APAC, what their qualifications are, who are on the Plan Commission?
I'm sorry, I don't know offhand who you're talking about. I'm sorry.
Mike Shaw, Cindy Franklin, and the young woman who sits there on the Plan Commission.
She must be when Allison, is Allison on planning?
I mean,
No,
Allison,
not Allison. She's, Talia, is that her name? Talia.
what you-
Talia works for APAC. I don't know what her qualifications
Okay.
are. And then there's Mike Shaw and Cindy Franklin, who are pharmacists. So,
Well, Mike Shaw certainly brings diversity to the Plan Commission.
but without depth of knowledge, what's the point?
What makes you think that none of these people have what you call a depth of knowledge? You're just saying Scott Berman shouldn't be on the Plan Commission.
I did not say that. I don't know
It-
Scott Berman,
Well,
but I'm just,
that's
Okay.
the subject before us this evening. And all I can tell you is there is nobody who has an application in that can match Scott's. That doesn't mean that there aren't others who aren't qualified. And if an opening comes up, I will take into consideration them and recommend them to the village board.
Am I allowed to repeat something that I said? This wasn't sure.
We have to do it so we get the recording.
Fair enough. I wasn't trying to make a stink about Scott Berman. Everything you said sounds fine. But the three people that Judy just brought up are actually people who are on the caucus party board and on the Plan Commission. Of 5 of 9 people fit that bill. The problem isn't Scott Berman, and I did say in my written comments, which made me able to cover, I think, everything, I'm sure I'll realize something I forgot, that if this was the only situation, I wouldn't have been looking so deeply. But it is curious to me, being that I know people who've applied for the Plan Commission, and it could be that he was more qualified. This is not the first time I know people who've applied to a commission and been denied. And it's not the first time that somebody is being appointed to the Plan Commission who seems to have pretty close ties to people who are on the caucus party board. And that, for me, if it was the only time, we wouldn't be having this discussion. It's not the first time, second time, third time. And you want to talk about Mike Shaw brings diversity. You have 2 people of color who have resigned in the last year, George Mitchell and Sheila, don't let me say, and you have appointed 3 white people. The board is 6 men and 3 women. So please do not bring up Mike Shaw as an effort to make the board diverse when we have actually been going backwards in the last year with regards to that board reflecting the demographics of our community.
I disagree.
Math is math. It's actually a statistic. You cannot disagree. There
Okay.
are 6 men and 3
Okay,
women.
Okay,
Okay, let's go, I think
Okay.
I call for the vote.
okay. Call the vote, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
I vote nay.
Trustee Klein,
I vote aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. Next item on the agenda is report of our village manager, John Lockerbie.
Thank you, Mayor Van Dusen. Trustees, good evening, everyone. Item A is regarding a proposed ordinance amendment for feeding of wildlife or birds, section 18-11, and number of dogs, which is section 18-39 of the village code. Included in the packet this evening is a memo from the Health and Human Services Director, Mike Charlie, and Police Chief Brian Baker, who works closely with Deputy Chief Jesse Barnes, who's with us this evening on animal control. But the memo is in regarding to amending the village's ordinances for feeding of wildlife or birds and the number of dogs. The village regularly reviews ordinances to evaluate the purpose and needs. Staff is recommending that platform feeders be prohibited. Platform bird feeders attract the widest variety of nuisance species as well as the greatest number of birds. The village has observed an increase in nuisance species in recent years, including rats, squirrels, raccoons, possums, and skunks. Bird feeding has been identified as one of the top contributing factors, and thus this recommendation is one of several strategies to reduce this nuisance activity. On second note, staff is recommending increasing dog limitations by 1 to allow for up to 3 dogs in any single-family residence and lot, as well as up to 2 dogs in any apartment or condominium. Staff feels that increasing dog limitations will not have any adverse effect on the health and welfare of residents or dogs and is responsive to resident feedback that we have received. I concur with staff's recommendations and respectfully request mayor and board approval for Corporation Council to prepare the necessary ordinance amendments.
A motion to concur with the staff recommendation is in order. Trustee Robinson, seconded by Trustee Kuhn. Are there any comments or questions? Trustee Klein.
Just to get one thing on the record, I want to make sure that we do not allow ground feeding either.
Yeah, we don't allow ground feeding. no.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
that's still intact. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Robinson has a question.
Oh, Trustee Robinson.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a couple of questions. One, I appreciate the recommendation. Just curious to know, was there ever any discussions about cats?
So, there wasn't, no. We didn't consider increasing cat limitations. And in the 2 years I've been here at the village, no one's approached me from outside the village or inside the village with that request. So it's something that, no, at this point in time, we didn't consider it unless,
Are there regulations for cats?
yeah, there are limitations on cats, yeah.
Ah.
I think I have it here, hold on a sec.
Johnny on the spot.
I don't think it's gonna be listed there.
Yeah, I don't think I have it in
Okay.
here. But 4 cats, I think is what it says here. No person shall allow or permit more than 2 dogs and no more than 4 cats whenever licensed, whether licensed or not, to remain or about a single-family residence.
Thanks. And the second question, was there any reason that prompted the review of the ordinance to increase the dogs?
Yeah, I think that it was based on the fact that there had been at least one resident that had expressed interest in increasing limitations. I think that it was a personal reason, just because he lives in a single-family home and he had 2 dogs and he wanted a third dog to keep as one dog company because the other dog wasn't getting along with his second dog. But I'd been through this before in my previous positions with previous municipalities, and we increased limitations to what we're recommending today, and we didn't see any negative effects at all. No additional nuisance calls. And the important thing to remember is that Animal control and the police department do a really good job with enforcing the ordinance. And on a case-by-case basis, we'll continue to work on those things and educate residents and work with them to make sure that we limit the issues with limitations.
That was gonna be a part of the next question about how do you enforce it? Like, what are the fines? Like, are there warnings? Like, what's the process?
So, in discussions with our animal control officers, this is not something, too many dogs in a household is something that they see maybe once a year. They've never had to force anyone, I'm not sure about fines and things of that nature, but they've never had to force anyone to get rid of a pet in those situations. Sometimes it's been a situation where somebody's pet sitting for somebody, or somebody's staying temporarily or something like that. But they, when we had discussions about this, they had no issues with it, and I believe it's very in line with other communities around us. We were actually a little bit behind, I think, in comparison to some of the other communities.
And last but not least, sorry, Mayor. Is there an additive, like doggy parks, like with a increase in the allowance of dogs? Is there like a recognition of maybe there's like dog parks or dog places to go to accommodate? I'm asking questions from the community. I got questions.
I think we have a pet lover here, I don't know, right?
Well, the Skokie Park District did recently modify their policies so that dogs are allowed in parks with certain limitations there, and we still have the dog park as well. They're always looking for, I think, space. I think that's been an ongoing issue as far as from the Park District side, being able to provide another designated place for the dog park, but at this point, there's one, and it is allowed in certain areas of our parks today. I can at least answer that part.
Thank you.
This is going back to the bird feeder discussion.
Sure.
Can you just distinguish platform feeders from the other kinds of bird feeders that were still going to be allowed?
Yeah, so platform feeders are feeders which essentially are platforms, 4x4 platforms that you stick directly on the ground and allow for easy access to nuisance wildlife, including what John Lockerbie had mentioned, you know, the raccoons, the squirrels, the opossums, the skunks, and rats. So it's just essentially what it sounds like. It's just a 4x4 platform you stick on the ground and for feeding birds that feed off the ground.
And can you tell us like what kind of ensuring compliance is going to look like, or what kind of penalties there might be if residents still use these?
Well, animal control is within the police department. I can answer that question, but.
Go for it.
Okay. So with any ordinance issue, I think the first step is and we're only going to enforce it on a case-by-case basis. It's not something we're policing. And we always begin with education, right? I mean, we don't go into situations and issue citations. So if somebody is platform feeding, we'll provide them a copy of the ordinance. We'll provide them, information as to why we amended the ordinance and why we're asking them to do it, and give them different options. You know, you can still feed birds without placing the bird seed on platforms of feeders. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
You answered my question about the platform feeders, but I do have a comment about the dogs, and I urge you to, if more people are going to have dogs and the dogs are allowed in the parks, it is a huge temptation for people to take them off the leash, and it is not okay. I can't tell you how many times I've had to get in between my daughter and a dog that was off the leash, and by the time you call animal control, I'm sorry, but it's like 20 minutes and it's too late. So please make a better effort to enforce the leash law. Thank you.
Okay, I serve on the condo board from Hell, so I would just like to know, how does this affect condos? Because currently we have limits on the number of animals, because obviously in a condominium building, you're sharing walls, ceilings, floors, close proximity. So upping this to 3 dogs is huge. Right now, at our condo, the limit's on 3 pets. Can be 1 dog and 2 cats, or 2 dogs and 1 cat, but if it goes up to 3 dogs,
I appreciate the
So just-
question. Let me provide some clarification. So the proposal this evening is to increase the regulated number by 1, and so that means 2 for a multi-unit building, condominium or apartment, and 3 for single family. And the reason for that differential is because a single family also has a yard. And so in a condominium or apartment situation, we recognize that there's elevators commonly, there's hallways commonly, and so the communal living that you're referring to of sharing walls and sharing ceilings and floors and so forth is part of the village's original ordinance to only allow 1 dog in a multifamily situation. And the proposal this evening is increase that to 2. And then in addition, the village is setting the absolute maximum limit, but the condominium board can have bylaws that supersede the village regulations as long as the condominium regulation is less than the village's regulation. So there's no obligation for a condominium board such as yours to change your regulations.
okay, thank you. Because the other issue about condominiums is that many of them are small. So just by allowing an increase of 1 in a 800 square foot dwelling is quite a bit. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate the feedback.
I also had a question on the platform feeders that was actually answered, but it's driving me to make a comment that hopefully you will word the ordinance very carefully. It's currently in the ordinance that you cannot ground feed. I've never thought I could put a platform on the ground, because to me that feels like the same thing. When I saw we were trying to get rid of platform feeders, I thought you were gonna make me get rid of my hanging platform feeder, but I read that it was something on the ground, then you said ground. You go to a bird food store, a platform feeder is something that hangs from a pole. I guess it could also be one that goes on the ground, to super clarify. And on the rat thing, there should really be as much public education as possible. I have so many feelings on the rat thing, but probably a month ago, my dogs caught a rat, brought it in, tried to bring it into my house. I almost had a heart attack. They didn't completely kill it. Had to call my husband at work, because then I was like damsel in distress. A whole ugly thing. Searched my house for burrows. They're nowhere. Rat was passing through. The rats are not living there, but we emptied all our feeders. I know you could have 3, 2 hummingbirds, unlimited, all this stuff. I've read the code 1,000 times. But we emptied the feeders because I don't even want a rat passing through. I don't want my dog to eat a poisoned rat. It's a whole thing. People need to know that they really should stop feeding the birds, period, because there's drop and this is the second time. The last time was 2016, so we were ratless for a long time, but, I look at the starving cardinals and get a little sad. The other thing I'm gonna bring up, which I've brought up with the health department 1,000 times, we've been poisoning rats for forever. It is not working. We need to look into other solutions. We are killing the birds that eat the rats as we poison the rats. There is tons of research on secondary poison. We are killing their predators. The poison doesn't work. There are other solutions. And Skokie tends to use the poison as a silver bullet. I had a rat's nest when my garage was being built in 2016. I hear a lot more people talking about rats now. That's a long time of using poison. The poison does not work as fast as the rats reproduce. There are things like ContraPest that are contraceptives for rats that have been tested in other markets. There are other solutions. And to tell you the truth, I know I'm getting a little off the wayside, but we said rats, so I feel like I have to say it. I didn't report when I saw that rat. I will never report when I saw a rat, because in 2016, I could call to report. In 2023, I have to sign a waiver online that you can poison on my property. And I am very opposed to poison for a whole list of reasons. I know I am not alone, and we're also not gonna solve the problem if that is the only solution, because you will never hear from me if I have a 12-hole burrow for somebody to come look on my property, because I don't think that the poison is the solution. And in 2016, they solved my problem pretty quickly. with snap traps that didn't kill birds of prey. And I've rescued birds of prey. I actually just brought a frozen one that have died of rat poisoning, so I know that it happens. I've seen it.
Maybe I can just provide a little bit of public education. So, the village has a very aggressive rat management program, and so we work very diligently to abate the rodents in town, the rats in town. I think the last statistics that I saw over the last 4 years or so, we went from 280-ish approximately active sites to about 78. And so the multidisciplinary team that includes manager's office, Public Works, the Health and Human Services Department, Animal Control, works very diligently to research best practices and to address this situation. The city of New York is renowned as having a good handle on abatement strategies. The village does have one dedicated employee that is focused on the rodents. And so anytime that anyone in the public has a concern about rats, Lillian is a good contact, a good resource, which is very helpful, because what happens in the rat world is that when they establish their home in a burrow, they like warmth, they like foundations. And so it's very common for the burrows to be against a foundation, and then the feeding source can be 600 feet away. And so the reason that it has to be a multidisciplinary team to really reduce the rodent activity as it relates to rats is because the food source is so important. And so tonight we have focused in on birds being fed with birdseed, which is one source, but so is fruit, so is vegetables. And so when the fruit trees drop on the ground, that's a food source. The Kit Kat wrapper that's left outside of a refuse toter is a source of food. And so, the property standards has an aspect of this responsibility. And so the village very much appreciates the feedback that we receive about the rodent activity, but it's crucial for people to report activity so that we can address both where the rats are living and the food sources. So I appreciate the comments.
Any other comments or questions?
The rat world?
It's going to be a movie.
Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Aye.
Trustee Klein,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. Next item on the agenda is report of our Corporation Counsel, Michael Lorge.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. Item A is an ordinance that was removed from consent agenda for second reading tonight at the beginning of the meeting. First reading was on February 21, 2022. This ordinance will establish the compensation for the village manager, deputy village clerk, corporation counsel, assistant corporation counsels pursuant to Chapter 2, Article 3 of the Skokie Village Code, and it is consistent with the village budget. Mayor, I'd request board action on this evening.
A motion is in order. Trustee Sutker, seconded by Trustee Robinson. Comments or questions? Trustee Johnson.
I have a few comments tonight. So tonight's the first time that this ordinance is being brought to a vote. And this ordinance provides for the continued employment and the annual salaries of all the appointed officials that are selected by the elected officials of the village. And this includes our entire village legal department. As you are all very aware, I have some major concerns about political conflicts of interest with our village legal department, our corporation counsel's office. And so tonight, I am asking the village board to not vote on this ordinance. I believe it would be inappropriate for most members of the village board to vote on this ordinance tonight, since there are such clear personal and political conflicts of interest between members of the village board and members of our village legal department. So Mayor Van Dusen and trustees Sutker, Robinson, Kuhn, and Klein, I'm asking you all to consider recusing yourselves from this vote tonight. Outside of Village Hall in your personal lives, you all have very clear, explicit political associations with Assistant Corporation Counsel Jim McCarthy and Corporation Counsel Michael Lorge. They lead your local political party. They participated in the selection process by which you were chosen as candidates for this board. They prepared and circulated your nomination paperwork. They have fundraised on your behalf They have donated thousands of dollars to your political campaigns. They have volunteered and organized volunteers for your political campaigns and more. So I do not believe it's appropriate tonight for you to vote on their public compensations and their continued employment by the village. So I'm asking you to recuse yourselves. If you do not, you will be voting tonight to steer roughly $400,000 of public money to your own political campaign leaders. And that, in my opinion, is not the way that we should do things in the village of Skokie. I think this would be a clear case of what is sometimes called patronage politics. For reference, there is a history of trustees recusing themselves from votes due to conflicts of interest. I'll give you a few examples. Former trustee Randy Roberts used to recuse himself from votes concerning grant funding from the village to an organization that he serves on the board of directors of, even if it was just to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest between his village role and his outside position. Trustee Sutker does something very similar, recusing herself from votes concerning grant funding from the village to an organization that employs her to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. And in my opinion, the conflicts of interest that we're dealing with tonight are far more serious than the conflicts that have led trustees to recuse themselves from votes in the past. And I'll say that according to our village code, a conflict of interest can mean any personal interest or association that is incompatible with an official's official duties or could impair an official's independence of judgment or action in the performance of their official duties. There have been 2 ethic complaints and 3 Open Meetings Act violations concerning the misconduct in our village legal department. And I believe that the political conflicts of interest between members of this board and members of our legal department have not only allowed this misconduct, but have allowed it to continue without consequence. And so I'm asking the board tonight to kind of finally deal with this. And I'm asking all of you to consider recusing yourself from this vote tonight. Thank you.
It would seem to me that this is mixing apples and oranges. Would anybody expect Joe Biden to appoint a Republican as Attorney General or as Secretary of Health and Human Services? Of course not. You would appoint somebody who is in alignment with your political philosophy, just as we would never expect President Bush or President Trump to appoint a Democrat to any cabinet level position, including Attorney General of the United States. In fact, we appoint the U.S. attorneys through a political process. The prosecutors are appointed through each of the U.S. senators. That's what they call a blue slip. The point here is when somebody is appointed to an office, they're expected to do their job. All of the corporation councils, Harvey Schwartz, Barbara Meyer, Pat Hanley, Michael Lorge, have done their jobs. In fact, Harvey Schwartz and Barbara Meyer were appointed to the Cook County Circuit Court, and they served admirably. The purpose of this, and Pat Hanley, nobody ever disputed Pat Hanley's competence as an attorney. And I don't know anybody who disputes Michael Lorge's or anybody else's in our Corporation Counsel's office of their competency. The village board appoints the village manager. We also appoint the Corporation Counsel. And we do it separately, so we get independent legal advice. I think everybody saw on display the importance of that kind of advice when we took up the idea of the decommissioning at Optima. It was a legal and constitutional thicket. Took expert advice. There was nothing political involved in it. Nobody has ever said that our Corporation Counsel's office, going back to Harvey Schwartz and Barbara Meyer and Pat Hanley, render legal opinions or do legal work for the village in a political way. John Lockerbie did not sacrifice his First Amendment rights when he became village manager. What we ask of John is what we ask of Michael, and we ask of everybody else who works for the village of Skokie. When you are at work, do your job. Do it fairly and do it without favor. What you do away from the job is your business. We have had members who work for the village who were involved in local politics. But it was off the job and it was away from the job. When the governor of Illinois appoints somebody to be the head of DCFS or appoints somebody to any other staff position, Illinois Department of Public Health, we don't quarrel. You can be certain that the governor's office checks to see what is the person's political affiliation. And when they're away from the job, it's their business to do what they wish as far as politics goes. Just as President Biden, just as Governor Pritzker have appointed people who are in alignment with their political philosophy, that is the prerogative of the village board in limited cases. When John became village manager, we appointed him because he is qualified and he is a quality person. When we appointed Michael Lorge, we appointed him because he is a qualified lawyer. And like I say, that goes all the way back to Harvey Schwartz, Barbara Meyer, and Pat Hanley. And let me just point out, like in the case of Harvey Schwartz, he was appointed as an associate judge of the circuit court. I don't know how much that means to any of you, but it was at the time of the Greylord scandal. Some of you might remember that. It was a scandal regarding judges of the circuit court. And the court turned to Harvey Schwartz and asked him to lead the reorganization of the circuit court. They didn't. All they asked of Harvey was that he do the job. And he did. We have not had a scandal in the circuit court since then. So we have always had quality men and women who have served as our corporation counsel. And then let me finally point out that the complaints that have been made have been dismissed by the Ethics Commission in every instance. Yes, ma'am. Yep, please. If we could have your name, please.
Tess Cristobal, 3357 Wilder Street. As a member of Go Green Skokie, I am very concerned that the politicization of our village legal department is a hindrance to our sustainability advocacy. Hence, I would like to express my strong, very strong support for Trustee Johnson's move for a nonpartisan corporation counsel's office.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Matthew Glebe. Thank you very much for your time. And I just want to point out first that you can probably separate some of the appointments in this ordinance, and that might allow you to proceed with any that are non-controversial, separate from the ones that maybe are. And that might be a good way forward, because it's very easy to report suspected bribery or fraud. I could literally do it right there while I'm in this meeting. I can just copy the link. I'm not planning on it. So if you do this vote and there is a chance that it looks like maybe it was inappropriate, then maybe there's a standard you want to be above reproach. You don't want to suspect. You don't want anyone in the village to have any inkling that there's something off, because that would be not above reproach, and that's not. You guys are all beyond that. So I'm not sure the path forward to address it, but don't put yourself on the record. And I'm not saying giving this advice as a lawyer, but don't put yourself on the record having heard that statement and then to vote for something that is possibly bribery. So don't do that to yourself. That would be awful. So I recommend, for what it's worth, that you perhaps submit a motion to separate it and address how you're going to move forward for the issue. And I'm saying that knowing that the counselor is probably beyond reproach and there's no problems here. But maybe let's just make sure that there's no chance that anyone in the Skokie could ever think something was off. Just alleviate the concern of Trustee Johnson, is my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, Emi Yamauchi from Skokie. I just wanted to mention that there are instances where there were executive branch heads of department that were appointed by a president of the opposite party. I believe William Cohen and Norman Mineta were both appointed by presidents not of their party.
True.
Number one. Number two, there is for federal employees such a thing as the Hatch Act, which means that no, it doesn't matter if you're not on the job. If you're getting paid out of public funds, you are by definition 24/7 a public servant. So there is that. Lastly, some of what Trustee Johnson said I found pretty shocking, and I would think that any elected body would want to avoid even the appearance of conflict of interest and a form of nepotism. Because when groups of people, as we've shown through history, are systematically excluded from participation in the public arena, whether it's women, minorities, or people without connections to the Skokie Caucus Party, you lose a huge wealth of talent, knowledge, energy. So I would just encourage the board to please cast the net far wider, give everyone a fair chance, because recycling, even though I'm in favor of recycling, when it becomes recycling of the same people over and over again on the commissions, it does give the impression that we are really stuck in the mud. Thank you.
So once again, my comments about optics and transparency. As Trustee Johnson already said, Trustee Sutker did the right thing when she recused herself from voting on the community development grants because she works for one of the agencies requesting money and wanted no part of a conflict of interest. Secondly, I don't know who made the decision to hire a special counsel to create the ordinances for the electoral reform referendums that were passed by the voters of Skokie, but that was the correct and ethical thing to do so that there would be no conflict of interest, as many in the corporate counsel's office actively worked at polling places and in the community against the referendums. However, the ethics commissioners did not see any conflict of interest when they recently reheard a formal complaint by Trustee Johnson against the mayor regarding the sustainability referendums he put forward to block citizen-led electoral reform referendums. As you know, ethics commissioners are appointed and also dismissed by the mayor as per village ordinance. I don't understand how a complaint against the mayor was thus heard by these commissioners. They should have recused themselves and have had a different body hear and decide on the complaint. I have no idea how this would work, but the current system does not work when the mayor is involved. The only reason the Ethics Commission had to rehear the case was because an independent watchdog, who is not even from Skokie, filed a complaint with the Illinois Attorney General regarding open meetings violations. I'm sure the chair and the 2 clergymen who are part of the commission are fine, upstanding citizens. But the optics are awful and unethical and cause an average citizen like me to have less trust in my local government. It was not a surprise to anyone but the Skokie Caucus Party that the referendums passed. Every Skokie citizen, including this board, should go to Trustee Johnson's Facebook page with an open mind and read his comments and decide for themselves if his claim was sufficient and if there was probable cause to further investigate. As you know, the commission found Trustee Johnson's claim as not sufficient, and they did this without explanation. I really hope that I don't feel the need to keep coming to the board meetings to talk about optics and transparency. And I also want to say, Mayor Van Duzen, to say that Mike Shaw on the Plan Commission brings diversity, that sounds more like tokenism. And Cynthia Franklin and Talia, they're women, and I guess it sounds like tokenism to me. Thank you.
You're taking care of what was gonna be my last comment, but since we're talking about the Ethics Commission, I attended the first ever Ethics Commission meeting last week. Since you brought up that both of the complaints were dismissed, I think it's important to point out in this public forum that the first one was definitely in violation of the Open Meetings Act, since last week I attended, again, the first ever public Ethics Commission meeting. So the first complaint that was dismissed, it's a technicality that too much time has passed. It was not heard, it was not considered properly, and that is a shame and shows that there is a problem within our government and within our commissions.
And when it was pointed out, it was corrected.
Well, but you
We
can't correct the
understand.
first one. But
I
I want the room
understand.
to understand
I
because
understand.
you made a blanket statement that 2 cases were dismissed.
Well, they were.
And they were,
They
but the
were.
first one also did not follow the Open Meetings Act. It's just that too much time has passed, period. So it would also have to be reheard. Those meetings were not handled appropriately, and they were only finally handled appropriately when the feet were to the fire from the Attorney General's office.
it was-
There's a problem with our commissions. So I attended the first ever Ethics Commission meeting last week. To say there is, at a minimum, an appearance of a conflict of interest is an understatement. On June 28th of last year, that was the day of the primary election, outside of Elizabeth Myers School, a polling location, the adult son of the chair called James Johnson an animal to a volunteer who was collecting signatures for the Skokie Alliance for Electoral Reform. That was one of 3 interactions I had with the adult son of the chair of that commission between that day and election day, but I digress. I also want to point out that I didn't realize that until sitting there halfway through that meeting, that that's who that chair was. It's enough of an appearance,
His son
his adult son.
said something to somebody else and that affects him. Is that what you're saying?
I'm trying to finish my comment.
I'm
I'll
trying to
get there.
understand your comment.
Well, but
That's-
if I finish, maybe you wouldn't have to argue with me, Ralph Klein.
I'm not arguing.
Behave,
I'm
behave,
trying to
behave.
understand. I'm asking for
Behave,
clarification.
Behave.
Who are you talking to, lady?
I did not make the connection until during the Ethics Commission meeting. It's enough of an appearance of a conflict that all commissioners are appointed by the mayor, who is at the center of the complaint, for something I'll always believe was unethical and warranted at least an investigation to determine whether it violated the ethics code of Skokie or the state, so that you can do better. I don't think that if you violated ethics either in my own brain or written down on a piece of paper that you realized. But I think that this government has run as such a hodgepodge with one group steering the wheel, never having to pay attention, having secret phone calls, maybe talking about something else and dismissing a complaint, and then being called out by the Attorney General. Let's do things the right way.
Wait a
The
minute, you
commissions are
alleging
smoke
that-
and mirrors.
Wait, you're alleging that somebody made a phone call or something?
No, I'm
What are
saying there
you
was not an
alleging?
open meeting. I'm saying that there was a conversation, there was supposedly, according to the commission, They had a conversation and decided that both complaints didn't have merit. And there was enough time to report one by some dude who I had the pleasure of meeting at that Ethics Commission meeting last week, who watches Elmhurst and Elk Grove Village. Watch out for him, because he's all over the place. But he's the one who reported it to the Attorney General when he saw it in the Tribune. When he saw that the complaint was dismissed in the Tribune, that was too late to address the first complaint. That was dismissed in the same way. I don't know if it was a phone call. I don't know if it was an email. I don't know if they just took a nap. I don't know if they ever discussed it, and neither do you. There are no meeting minutes. There is no recording of a conversation. There is no documentation, nothing.
There was, the chairman did write a report to Trustee Johnson reporting on their deliberations.
Okay.
And I think it's very dangerous to start making allegations.
I'll let you read this, and you can tell me what wasn't true.
Well, you're alleging that there might have been some secret phone call or email or something.
It was a secret. It was not an open meeting. That's what I'm
may-
saying.
may
We
I-
don't know how it happened. It
may-
was it an open meeting?
May I finish?
You're accusing me.
I'm not, no.
Okay.
I'm asking you a question.
I'm asking you, how did the
Because
meeting-
I'm telling you, first of all, the first meeting, I agree with you.
And the second meeting.
Forget it.
Okay.
Forget it. I'm not going to say anything further. You're not going to listen.
I'm listening.
No, you're not. No, you're
But
not.
you're trying to
You-
get
no.
trying to get a sound bite out,
No, I'm not
and
trying
I
to.
just wanted to be honest.
Okay, okay.
If I may. I just want to respond to a few of your comments earlier. You talked a lot about the legal competency of our current village attorneys and past village attorneys. So I just want to say, my statement was not about the legal competency of any attorneys that have ever served the village of
I know.
Skokie. My comments were about ongoing political conflicts of interest between members of this board and members of our legal department. Mayor, you also talked about how it is perfectly reasonable for this board to appoint people to our legal department that share a political philosophy. I don't disagree with that at all. My problem is the historic practice of this board of appointing their own political party and political campaign chairs to serve as the leaders of our public legal department. Next, Mayor, you also talked about how every member of our legal department has their First Amendment rights of free political speech outside of Village Hall. I in no way want to compromise anyone's free speech rights. My problem is that the separation of the political and the administrative is not as clear as you suggested. There have been multiple occasions in which some of our village attorneys have done political work during the performance of their village duties. Lastly, I think you very fairly compared our village legal department to our village manager's department, which I think is fair. We have two very different appointment processes for our village corporation council and our village manager. We do not treat these two employees the same. Our village code very explicitly states that our village manager must be a non-partisan position. This language is not included in our village code for corporation council. Our manager is selected by the entire village board. Our corporation council is selected by the mayor and then approved by the village board. Also, and this is probably the most important thing, Mayor, our village manager, it's actually part of his contract to follow a code of ethics that very explicitly prohibits certain kinds of political activity outside of Village Hall that could compromise people's faith in professional administrators. We have an incredible double standard in how we treat our village manager and our village corporation council. the multitude of political activities that some of our village attorneys are engaged in outside of Village Hall, we do not deem appropriate for our village manager, and yet for some reason we deem it appropriate for our village attorneys. And so to me, this is just a double standard.
I obviously disagree. I believe that there is a political system. Our United States attorneys, just as an example, they don't just become United States attorneys because they're good attorneys. They are good attorneys. Very, very, very few U.S. attorneys are not very good U.S. attorneys. Most of them come from prestigious law firms, as a matter of fact. But it's a political process. They go through the United States Senate. They have to be sponsored. They have to be politically sponsored in order to get the job. And it is political. If you can be certain that Senator Durbin is not going to propose somebody to be the U.S. Attorney for the district, the Northern District of Illinois, who is not a Democrat. You can be certain of that. That does not mean that the United States Senate is compromised. And it's true, there is the Hatch Act. We have what we call the merit system of government. It's not the Hatch Act, but it's a form of that. But we also appoint the Corporation Council. The entire board appoints the Corporation Council. And we do so because we want somebody who is aligned with our political philosophy. And it's important when you get advice that you get it so that he understands, or she, where we're coming from. You may disagree with that. You may disagree with the political philosophy. But I think it's important that we recognize that it's not unique to the village of Skokie. Corporation councils everywhere in the suburbs are involved in politics. There are very few, in fact, I can't think of one corporation council or somebody who is retained by a municipality, even more so, who is not involved in politics. It's a part of the legal system. And it's in the contract that John is going to operate according to an established code of ethics of municipal managers. It's also accepted that our corporation councils, going back to Harvey Schwartz, and before him, are going to uphold a municipal code of ethics. And that includes the ethics of the Illinois Bar Association, as well as the National Bar Association Code of Ethics. Yes, sir.
I just want to reiterate that I don't think anyone is accusing there of being any sort of impropriety, but I want to reiterate that it appears that there seems to be like a controversial or potential appearance of that with this particular appointment, and I'm recommending that you break up what's being proposed here so that the components that are less controversial can be addressed succinctly.
Go ahead.
And then the ones that are maybe more controversial, I just kind of recommending, you know, and I'm just saying as someone who's just attending the meeting, you know, I just showed up. I didn't know everything. I just had a few minutes. I figured I'd come in, and I'm taken aback by kind of some of it. And if that's just me, maybe, you know, if I was sitting in as a trustee's chair, you can bet I would absolutely want to defer this a little longer so I can call someone who's a lawyer and make sure I'm not going to get a phone call from the FBI or something, or you have to deal with a bunch of paperwork, even if I did nothing wrong. So I'm just kind of recommending for expediency of the meeting, maybe break it apart and come back in like a month or whatever.
Should Joe Biden have withdrawn Merrick Garland's nomination because
Well, if someone
people were
yeah,
making
sorry.
allegations about him?
I think if someone had said
That's a part
that,
of the
if someone had stood up and said, I saw Merrick Garland give Joe Biden $100,000, then yes, absolutely.
And
He
it
should
would
have
been-
held it.
and
Yeah,
it-
yeah.
and it
And
would
I
have
think,
been withdrawn.
yeah, yeah. And of course, and so what he's brought up is that there could be something there. And if he's saying it as a voice of part of Skokie, and you guys are the voices of Skokie, if I was a trustee and I didn't even know that, I'm like, what are they talking about? I would definitely not want my name after that statement being on the record that I could have an appearance of it. So I'm kind of recommending for time that you separate what can be done, no one has any problems with, everyone's good. That sounds like that's the village manager, and I think it was the clerk. Push those forward, approve, and then maybe defer a month, just so you can make sure everyone's on the same page, so he's satisfied, and so that y'all can unanimously move forward or something. That's,
With all due respect, Trustee Johnson is not going to be satisfied.
well,
That's
okay,
the point.
that's
mean,
that's
that-
fine. But I'll
This is
just,
not the first time that this has come up. is
this
not the-
particular issue?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it's come up
th-
many times.
Yes, this has come up before.
It's a personal thing with him.
Well, isn't, you're saying the question on there being impropriety with the
And it was,
counselor
yes.
is an
and
ongoing issue?
It was reviewed by an attorney and by a rabbi. And they both said there was no merit to it.
Okay,
The attorney who saw it thinks that Johnson's an animal. No
okay.
conflicts there.
I,
Stop, stop.
all I guess what I'm saying is, if I'm sitting in the chair of someone who has to vote
we
on this,
understand.
which I'm not, I would, like, and if you guys are all confident on it, then good. But you'll have as I said, this will be on record of you having explicitly been told of a possible problem and you going forward with it. So it definitely looked like, to me, it looks bad. And I don't know what's going on. So maybe it makes sense to do the efficient stuff, make a note, make sure that next meeting you have like someone stand up here and swear under oath that they assert and take on the legal liability for you, so you don't have to do that. Because, if someone just so much as flags you, you're getting paperwork, right? And I don't know if you guys have a lawyer already on retainer, but someone's going to have paperwork for you if, HHS and FBI decides that there's something fishy. Or, I don't know, Tribune decides they want to watch this recording, which would be kind of interesting for them. But that's all. I'm just suggesting for efficiency, maybe move on, get the other stuff taken care of.
Understood. Thank you.
But thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
I just want to quickly say that it was for insufficient, I don't know what the word was, but there's no form that they even give you to tell you what makes a sufficient claim. It had nothing to do with probable cause. They did not vote on yes or no for probable cause. It was insufficient claim, whatever that meant, they did not explain it.
That is probable cause.
No.
Yes, it is. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, just in response to these few comments. To Trustee Klein, I just want to say, this is not personal for me.
Oh, come on.
I am trying to reform our village legal department. This is systemic.
And then you were trying to reform the rest of us? And what else are you trying to?
I would also like,
Our voting record? What else are you trying to reform, sir?
Please, let Trustee Johnson, then we'll vote.
Mayor Van Duzen, I understand why you, I understand kind of the sentiment of why you said that you thought that kind of nothing would satisfy me. I will be fully satisfied when this village board finally updates the appointment process for village attorneys, which has not been substantially updated since the late 1950s. When that is done, I will be satisfied.
Okay, understood.
Could live up to that.
Well, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Can I make a statement real quick?
Okay.
I'm just sitting here. I just want to say a couple of things. First thing, my vote is strictly on what I have witnessed in this seat as a representative of the community. With the work that the village manager, the deputy village clerk, and everybody's listed on this ordinance have done, which have been outstanding, in my opinion. So it's the body of work, you know. I'm separating. If Trustee Johnson, you think there's more to it, of course, I think it warrants further discussion. So I am totally willing to continue looking at what other people are doing, moving forward. You know, today my vote is in favor of this ordinance. So I vote aye, but again, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. Let's look.
Just to clarify, this is the second reading, not the first. This is not the ordinance to debate the outcome of the Ethics Commission, the appointment of the current or future corporation counsel, or the process. I'm voting to approve the cost of living and market adjustments for village manager, deputy village clerk, corporation counsel, and assistant corporation counsels for the village of Skokie.
Trustee Johnson,
I abstain.
Trustee Klein,
I'll vote aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. And Ruzi, just get Scott. Scott Berman came in. Thank you. The final item this evening
Sorry.
is public comment.
Before public comments, I have an item for new business.
Okay?
Under new business, I would like to place an item on our agenda for our next meeting on March 20th. This request is in response to the January 17th executive session of the village board, in which very regrettably, our entire village board violated the Illinois Open Meetings Act by having a private policy discussion about the appointment process for our village attorneys. According to the Open Meetings Act, it was not appropriate for us to do this during an executive session. And in my opinion, one of the best ways we can resolve this issue is to publicly have the conversation that we were not supposed to have privately. And so for the March 20th Village Board meeting, under new business, I am again requesting that the board review and consider revising our appointment process for the Village Corporation Counsel's Office, which, as I said earlier, has not been substantially updated since the late 1950s. Specifically, I'm referring to Chapter 2, Article 3, Division 5 of our Village Code, and I'm asking the board to review this section of Village Code with the aim to make this appointment process more explicitly nonpartisan. And I'm requesting that this discussion be under new business at our next meeting on March 20th.
Thank you.
I have something to add to that.
Sure.
For this agenda item, I request that it be a question and conversation about process, and that it's not personal, and that we keep it focused solely on the process itself.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to know if there was any update on Carvana. Has there been any communication with Carvana?
Not with me.
I'm trying to think what you're referring to. The issue hasn't changed, you know.
Okay, I just wanted to know. Secondly, I did look at your electoral reform link on the village website, and I saw that on February 24th, you closed the request for qualifications process. So I was just wondering, I mean, obviously without any names being given, but about how many law firms or legal consultants applied,
There were 3 that applied.
3 that applied. So you'll be moving on to a request for proposal stage?
We've actually conducted interviews of the 3 firms, and we're working with the top firms to see if we can come to a proposal, and we'll move forward from there. And so hopefully there'll be additional news soon.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I did want to address, I don't know if you remember Mayor Van Dusen, but I think at the last meeting, I asked about there being some kind of open public process for information being disseminated about some of the large developments that are coming up for decision and for vote. And at that time, you said sometimes it goes to the parents committee first, or commission first, sometimes it goes to plan. Okay, so at the last plan commission, I asked the chairman of the plan commission what the process was, and his response was that it was up to the developer to tell the people who live within 200 feet of the development that they were welcome to come to an open house. That's not what I'm talking about. The people who are interested in Skokie's development and future are not just the people who live 200 feet from the development. So again, I am asking that there be a public process for information. We shouldn't have to file FOIA requests whenever we want to know something. We should be able to get the public information in a predictable, regular way so that we are an informed citizenry. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, it's 250 feet.
It's still, there are more people than just the
Well, I understand your point,
from
I'm just
250
saying,
feet.
to get it correct.
Nick, can I? Okay, last time I was here, I talked about buildings and I was really kind of touting Passive House, and I thought, okay, fine, I'll move on to another topic. And then I was doing the reading for my coursework this week, and I kept on having these like rants in my head to the village board about this very topic, because I was reading a couple of chapters of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, the 4th National Climate Assessment. The 5th one is still in the works. It's coming out in a few months, which is why we're reading the old one. But here's the website. And these chapters were about mitigation and adaptation, and it was a risk-benefit analysis. And basically, they were saying, and this is the U.S. National Research Program, saying that it makes a lot of sense in terms of both mitigation and adaptation, especially when you have new buildings, to have strict building codes that are energy efficient. And investors even are starting to look at this and say, well, you know, or insurance companies are looking at places in floodplains and saying, okay, this is the 50-year map, right? This isn't what's happening now. This isn't what's happening in 5 years. The 50-year map is saying that's going to flood, so I'm going to make that place whatever you do with insurance. I don't follow those things. And then mitigation versus adaptation versus resilience, just for clarity. Mitigation is when you take steps to prevent future climate change. Adaptation is when you make buildings that can handle current changes, because we're already seeing current changes, and the effects that we expect to see in the next 20 to 40 years. And then resilience is how do you prepare now for future effects. So when I say everybody's doing it, right? Not everybody, unfortunately, not enough people are doing that. And that's one of the things they were saying. However, that was 5 years ago, and it's getting better all the time. But there are more and more municipalities that are starting to take building codes very seriously. And eventually, it is going to just be federal law. And here, this is a direct quote, that market forces and technological change have contributed to decline in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, which is great. And that 2016 saw the lowest emissions since 1994, again, which is great. But in the time since then, it's gone back up. So talking about reducing risks through emissions mitigation, and I want to say, I know you've already approved the sustainability plan. I'm going to get to my point in a minute. But it talks about the risks of inaction, where climate change affects human health, the economy, and the environment, including infrastructure. That timing and magnitude of action are important, because the longer you wait, like let's say you wait until 2040, and then you say, okay, we're going to hurry up and get all the way down to 0 by 2050. Well, all of that extra carbon is still in the air, and we have all of those warming effects. the more emissions will be in the air, the more warming will be committed to, and the faster we'll have to change if we wait. And again, and so, you know, that's what I'm on about. That we need to come up with strict building codes. So why am I talking to you about this? I also came across this article talking about how more and more states and municipalities are coming up with really strict building codes, because nationally, buildings account for about 34% of emissions, but in Skokie, it's closer to 60%, and that's according to our own greenhouse gas inventory. So the reason to push these energy efficiency policies is that not only do they immediately reduce the utility bills and indoor air pollution, but they address the overall building energy use, and those benefits just get passed down, right? Those are things you don't have to retrofit. There's plenty of funding out there. There are federal funding opportunities and state funding opportunities. And it turns out that passive house construction does cost about 10% extra than conventional cost, but having to retrofit it, which is going to have to happen, right? The state is going to eventually come up with strict codes that are going to be retroactive. Cost of retrofitting is much more than 10%. And especially if you're talking about installing geothermal heating, because that you can install underneath the building. You can't go and do that after you've already built the building. You do it while you're in the process of building it much cheaper. And in the meantime, you have to pay more for your utilities if you didn't make it passive house with geothermal heating. So the status of our building code, we know that it needs to be rewritten, and I know that the building department is holding off until Illinois comes out with its updated building codes. But Illinois is going to come up with some like general building code that applies for all of Illinois, right? Like what makes sense in Peoria doesn't necessarily make sense in Skokie, right? Clarksburg is not, they don't have these multi-use apartment buildings like what we're talking about, what you guys have been approving lately. Sparta is not built on a swamp, right? So different places need their own unique building codes. And the state legislature has to appease all of those people, whereas you guys can focus on what we need right here in Skokie. It can be much more flexible, I guess, and targeted with the building codes. So what can you do? Don't wait. Tell the building department to start working on the policies with this idea that if Illinois does come out with something stricter, it will default up to whatever Illinois comes out with. Put me on the group that works on the building code, because while the other people in the building department have the policy knowledge and the structural engineering experience, and they know what you need for that, I have a lot of green building knowledge. And it's growing all the time. And so this is, I mentioned my coursework, right? Registration for next semester is coming up. One of the courses I'm going to take at some point in the next 2 years ends with me taking the LEED Green Associate exam. So I could take it this summer. And then you have somebody on the team drafting the new building codes who has a Green Associate. So I urge you to get started on this right away. And tell the people who these things are in the pipeline. Sure, it's in the pipeline, it's been in the pipeline for 2 years, but they're still coming here for permission to get a variance for something, which means that they were willing to go back to the drawing board. So tell them to go back to the drawing board and put on a green roof. Tell them to put in geothermal. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Evening.
Good evening. My name is Boris Wernick, 4135 Main Street, Skokie. And I bug you again about the parking situation in our block. I mean, I don't know how to put it on screen. I brought you some pictures to see. Can I just pass them?
Yeah, there you go.
You will agree this vehicle is parked illegally and very dangerously for the people who walk on the walkway. So is this. Oh. So is the next one. So is the next one. The area where it's parked is not designated as a parking area. In order to get on it, they interlink with two sidewalks crossing at the corner. And after that, particularly this wonderful vehicle drives all the way through the block on the sidewalk to get out on the other end. There is some more, different side. There is some more, different location, farther the block. There is in-sequence pictures of the same vehicle, how it's parked, how it starts moving, how it's entering the sidewalk, how it continues on the sidewalk. And I mean, obviously, I don't have the time and the chance to catch all of them, but I do think we need to do something really fast about it, giving the guys at the police department ability to enforce it and get done with it, because this is something what shouldn't be happening. I'm pretty sure somewhere in those wonderful rules and regulations, it says, do not drive and do not park on the sidewalks.
Yeah, sir, we appreciate your feedback. I know that our building services manager was in touch with you, and so if you and I could touch base after the meeting, that would be very helpful. So if you'll be here for a few minutes, you and I can talk.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Trustee Johnson.
I have some comments for the board tonight as well. You all know I love Skokie history, and so my comments tonight are about the history of our village legal department. This department of our village government, which has been discussed a lot tonight, this department has been thoroughly politicized for over 60 years. And so I'd like to present a bit of historical context for some of the problems that we're still dealing with in 2023. Our village legal department was formally established in 1957, and this year is very important. It's the same year that Skokie transitioned to a council manager form of government. Skokie residents, by referendum, had just mandated that the village hire a nonpartisan village manager in order to better separate the politics of this board from the actual administration of our government. And residents were successful, despite the fact that this change was vehemently opposed by the mayor and the village board, who really wanted to preserve their own political power and control over all village departments. So in late 1957, the mayor and the village board, as the mayor and the village board were being forced to give up a lot of their administrative control over the village, the board formally established a legal department that could still be under the political control of the mayor's office. Our village legal department was established largely for political reasons. Less than 1 year later, our village legal department was already engaged in voter suppression and was already being used to block political opponents from the ballot. In 1958, the village board and corporation counsel William Hennessy tried to block a voter initiated referendum from the ballot. Residents had to sue the village, and it became a legal case that went all the way to the Illinois State Supreme Court, which ruled against the village and in favor of residents. The Illinois Supreme Court chastised this village board and our corporation council for trying to suppress the constitutional right of Skokie residents to change their government by referendum. In 1961, there was an entirely new village board, and in his very first meeting, new Mayor Myron Griesdorf fired the entire village legal department and replaced our village attorneys with his own political allies. 4 years later, I kid you not, the exact same thing happened again. In 1965, there was an entirely new village board, and in his very first meeting, new Mayor Al Smith fired the entire village legal department and replaced our lead corporation counsel with his own political campaign chair. Ever since, for the past 58 years, it has been the practice of this board to appoint at least one or two political campaign leaders to lead our public legal department. And there has often been a lot of problematic overlap between the public and the private roles of these village attorneys. In 1972, one of the most distinguished former trustees of this board, Cal Sutker, gave public comments, just as I am doing this evening. He said he believed at the time that it was completely inappropriate for a village corporation council to also serve as the campaign chair of the mayor, and that this was, quote, a conflict of interest by implication which is no less obnoxious than a direct conflict and maybe more dangerous. He demanded to know if the village corporation council was, quote, the master or the servant of the board. And he reminded the board that, quote, Village Hall is not the headquarters for any political party. In my research, I have found many more news stories in which residents or journalists have challenged the political conflicts of interest in the Village Corporation Council's office. I have found articles from 1973, 1988, 1996, 2002, 2012. The times have changed, but these conflicts have remained. In some cases, there's even been a revolving door between our village board and our legal department. In the 1960s, Corporation Counsel Bernard Harrison later became Trustee Harrison. In the 1990s, Assistant Corporation Counsel Harry Piper became a trustee and then went back to being an Assistant Corporation Counsel. And in 2012, Trustee Michael Lorge was appointed as Corporation Counsel. In 2020, Corporation Counsel Michael Lorge and Assistant Corporation Counsel Jim McCarthy personally tried to bribe and threaten an independent candidate for the village board in order to try to get them to drop out of the race. I know all about this because that independent candidate was me. In 2022, Lorge and McCarthy assisted Mayor Van Duzen in an attempt to block voter-initiated referendums from the ballot, just as the mayor and corporation council had tried to do in 1958. And thankfully, just like 1958, their attempt at voter suppression failed. Members of the board, it has been just 4 months since Skokie voters passed a referendum for nonpartisan elections in Skokie. Skokie residents want a nonpartisan village government, just as they did in 1957 when they passed the council manager referendum. Our village legal department has been thoroughly politicized for over 60 years. It is time for change because our public legal department belongs to the people of Skokie. It does not belong to any political party or organization. So again, I am calling on this board to finally update the appointment process for village attorneys in order to make our legal department more intentionally and explicitly nonpartisan. And I am also saying that I do not support the continued employment of Corporation Counsel Michael Lorge and Assistant Corporation Counsel Jim McCarthy by the Village of Skokie due to their repeated attempts to use their village positions to block political opponents from the ballot. I think the time for change is now. Thank you.
Trustee Sucker,
I move we adjourn.
we are adjourned.